Hello guys, welcome to my humble YouTube channel where I bring you fanfiction that will brighten your days. Before we start, a subscribe is greatly appreciated, and don't forget to leave a like and ring the bell icon so you won't miss exciting new fanfiction stories. Tensura of Bonds and Demon Lords by Ryagful. Chapter 15. The Summit. In a fog-shrouded castle deep in the puppet nation of Gistov, Demon Lord Clayman was furious. With a billowing scream, he threw the wooden table against the wall, shattering it to splinters. Shit. He screamed again as he ran a hand through his now disheveled hair. How could this happen? Exclamation mark. An entire army, wiped out by one Majin. Preposterous.
He had been waiting with anticipation the news that their Thorn, the new nation of Tempest, had been subjugated by his partner's puppet army from Falmouth.
However, what he got was far from pleasant. The entire army was annihilated.
How? He wasn't sure. The spy he had sent to monitor the army was killed before they could convey that particular information. Now, his carefully laid plans were in a shamble. It was even worse because, as he had found out from Frey, who found out from Milim, that simply having the destroyer kill everyone in Eurasania wasn't going to make him ascend to Demon Lord, as the souls of the people would simply be absorbed by her and not him.
And so he had to improvise and made Milim gave an ultimatum to Carrion. That way, only he would die and his own army could then swoop in and kill all the refugees. That, at least, he was happy was going according to plan. Now he was just waiting for news from Frey and Milim. Am I interrupting? He heard Frey say from behind him. He turned to look at her, angry at her amused expression.
Watch your mouth. Frey, he said in a low voice, remember who controls the lives of your people right now. He said. The harpy did not betray any expression. She simply stared. Understood. She finally said, in any case, you need not be angry right now.
Everything worked out on our part. Right, Milim, she said as a smaller figure walked in from behind her. Milim, wearing her blank expression from his mind control pendant, had a large black cape draped over her. Combined with her hair being loose, she had quite the different look to her than normal. She looked properly menacing. Of course, Clayman always knew she was menacing. Frey continued. Carrion in dead. The people of Eurasania are defenseless, as you wanted.
Clayman had to allow a sadistic grin at that. Running a hand to smooth out his hair, he walked over to Milim and brought her face up to look at him. Well done, Milim, he said as he looked into her blank eyes. Having you on my side makes things so much easier. He said as he stepped away. You could use a bath though. You smell of those filthy animals. He turned to Frey. Why don't you take her away for now?
Frey, take care of her. I have an army to prepare. He walked away, leaving Frey to grab Milim's shoulders and start leading her away. Oh, but first, he called as they were walking away, I will be calling a Walpurgis soon. Frey looked back with a look of concern. Make sure you and Milim back my claim, okay? And don't forget to have Milim write that letter for her people in the city of the Forgotten Dragon. My army will need their cooperation.
After a few moments, Frey simply nodded and closed the door. As the two left, he looked out the large window to the darkness outside. He could hardly suppress his excitement. Soon, he would have all the souls he would need to ascend as a true demon lord. Once he did that, that bastard Leon would pay, and his master would finally be avenged. Everything looked like it would work out for him. Some time later, in the kingdom of Fulbrosia, I hope Clayman's stench washes out. Milim said as she stretched in the bubbly bath. After leaving Clayman's castle, she and Frey made it to Jaw, the Fulbrosian capital, where Frey's servants prepared a bath for her. Well, you really did need a bath. Frey said from where she was sitting nearby, looking at her somewhat amused. I don't imagine being covered in all that sooth from when you blew Eurasania away was hygienic.
Yeah, Milim said. Had to do it. Carrion would have kept trying to fight if I didn't show him how hopeless it was. She explained as she rubbed her hair, speaking off. He should be fine. Frey told her. The poison should run its course in a day or two. He won't be happy, though. Whatever. Milim said. Dismissively. He's alive, his people are alive. What more could he want? He's lucky Clayman fell for our little trick, otherwise. She adopted a more serious look. I really might have had to do it. It was, in fact, Milim's idea to trick Clayman into believing he could not use Milim to harvest the souls he needed. As a true demon lord herself, she knew that, Even if she was faking it, killing enough people for Clayman would allow him to ascend. She wasn't about to let that happen, so she had Frey lie. Fortunately, it didn't seem like Clayman knew quite enough about the Harvest Festival and believed it.
I see. Frey said after a few seconds. She understood what Milim had meant.
If she had to choose between her and Carrier, Milim would have chosen to save Frey. She wasn't quite sure what to make of that. No one had ever been quite so. She didn't quite knew what word to use. Affectionate, perhaps. It was especially jarring because Milim would clearly prefer to fly over to her beloved Rimuru and make sure he was well, but didn't. Instead, she was gritting her own feelings away and keeping the promise she had made to Frey. Frey herself did not know if she could do the same. You know, this is nice and all, but I still prefer the baths in Tempest. Milim said cheerfully. Hee, when this is over, I'm dragging you over there for a dip, got it? She said with a mischievous smile.
Speaking of Tempest. Frey said, I heard some interesting news from there. It seems you were right and Rimuru did ascend to Demon Lord. She informed the girl, studying her as she furrowed her brow as she once again looked serious.
Of course. Milim said with no hint of the childish side she normally had. She was deadly serious, I heard the voice of the world say it. So it must be true. Abruptly, she stood up and got out of the bathtub. Grabbing a towel, she continued. I knew he had the potential, but still, she said as she began drying her hair. The fact that he actually went through with it, it kinda scares me a little. She finished and looked at Frey, a sad glint in her eyes.
What do you mean? Frey asked concerned. Milim looked her in the eyes and grimaced. It happened before. Someone ascending to true Demon Lord. And losing themselves. Sensing Frey's confusion, she continued, they changed. They were no longer the same. Their personalities, I mean. I had to put down a couple of people like that, before they would. She looked away, staring at some distant memory, go too far. And you're afraid the same will happen to Rimuru? Frey said as she understood. Milim nodded.
Yes, I still believe in him, but, she sounded like she wanted to cry, but held back. No, I shouldn't think like that, should I? She looked at Frey and smiled, back to her usual cheerful self. Yeah, everything's gonna be just fine. Hee, I wonder how strong he's gotten. I can't wait to see.
Frey looked on at Milim as she went into another rant of childish topics. She made a decision that day, at that moment, that would change the course of her kingdom's history. She had been carefully considering that issue for some time, but now she was sure it was the right call. Hey, Frey? Milim's voice brought her out of her thoughts. I said that it's ready. Frey looked at her confused, my analysis. You know, of Clayman's spell. I can break it. Right now if you want. She said with a wide grin. Frey had to consider her words for a few seconds. No, not right now. She said. It was Milim's turn to look confused. I would like to wait until the Walpurgis, if that's okay with you? Sure. The Dragonoid said, a bit unsure, it's your call, but why? Simple. Frey began as she too stood up. I want to see Clayman fall and suffer right in front of all the other demon lords. She said with venom in her voice. Only then will he be appropriately punished, don't you think?
Your call, like I said. Milim said as she walked over to a chair. Long as I get to kill him myself, it's good.
All right then. Frey said as she moved to where Milim was. She pulled a roll of paper and a quill out of her storage space now. How about you write that letter Clayman wanted? With a sigh, Milim took the two items and placed them on another chair. Frey dictated to her something appropriate, and when the smaller girl was finished she picked it up. She looked at Milim with a blank expression. You need to work on your handwriting. She told her bluntly. Milim shapelessly tried to dismiss it, but Frey did not want to hear it. And so, Milim spent the next few hours trying to please Frey by working on her handwriting. It was a mixed success.
So let me get this straight. Fuse said as he rubbed his temples. You were behind Veldora's disappearance this entire time. Rimuru tried to keep up a happy-go-lucky smile. That's how it is, he said with a little too much cheerfulness. The three others in the room looked at each other in concern. They were Fuse, Guildmaster of the Milim and Frey Guild, Gazel Dwargo, King of Dworgen and Elalud Grimwald, Archduke of Thalian. After casually blabbering out that Veldora was around, the three foreign allies of Tempest dragged Rimuru to a more private room to discuss the repercussions of what that meant. While his people were busy preparing a meeting place for their impromptu summit, he explained to them his circumstances. His death, reincarnation, meeting Veldora and befriending him, and up to the events that allowed him to bust the dragon out of his prison. Now, he had quite a bit on his plate to deal with. The emergence of a new demon lord was already troubling. Elalud said, but now the storm dragon's revival. This won't go down well, Rimuru. Gazel added, especially with the Western Church. They are especially hostile to the storm dragon. They will notice immediately. This will put you and by extension us, your allies in quite the predicament. So it would seem. Rimuru said as he though over the king's words. Truth was, he had always been an amateur at this political stuff. When he released Veldora, he didn't consider the long-term effects it may have. The more imminent threat posed by the Western Church was a much more bigger issue to him at the time, and now he realized his actions may drag even his allies into his problems. Say, Gazel, he said looking up at the dwarf. If we do become enemies of the Church, would you still side with us? What are you asking now, Rimuru? The king asked slightly exasperated. We already knew the Church sent people with Falmouth when we came to assist. Besides which, we owe the Church no favors whatsoever, he said firmly. That's a relief. I feel much more reassured if the senior disciple says that, Rimuru said with a genuine smile. Elalud looked over at him as he contemplated something. You really should be more careful. Do you know how other nations will view you if they find out what happened? War or not, a demon lord wiping out an army of 20,000 will be viewed as little more than evil. Most people will not know your circumstances and judge you accordingly. Rimuru contemplated his words. It was entirely true, and he would not expect anyone to look favorably at him. He certainly would not, if he had still been human. He looked over at Elalud and asked, what about Thalian? What's your stance? The Archduke looked like he was expecting that question and blew a sigh. It's hard to answer right now, but. Well, our position is tricky. Ellen was the one who prompted you to become a demon lord, didn't she? It wasn't a question. She told you that story, about the dragon princess, didn't she? In that case, if word got out that a high-ranking noble from Thalian was involved in the birth of a new demon lord, we would be in a very precarious position. Rimuru understood exactly what he was saying. He wanted to say something, but Gazel spoke first. No, the truth will never get out, he said firmly. Under Rimuru's curious gaze, he continued, all the corpses of Falmouth's army are gone, are they not? Then, there is no actual evidence left at all. Rimuru looked at his senior disciple in wonder. It was true, as he had offered the corpses as an offering to summon Diablo and his attendant demons. There was, in fact, nothing left but an empty camp. Yes, it's true, he told the dwarf. So, then, what kind of narrative do you have in mind? He asked with determination. Gazel looked at him in appreciation. Good. You have found the fortitude to embrace both good and evil. A king must hold no regrets. He told him and placed a hand on his shoulder and told him his plan. A few minutes later, the meeting was underway. Rimuru and his counselors were present, as were Gazel and his people, Elalud plus Aren, the three Beastkadirs and Fuse, who looked ready to pass out from the stress, Yom, Majulin and Grucius. Veldora was also there as an honorary advisors, though he was preoccupied with reading some manga. Lastly, Trainee the Dryad had also appeared, much to the shock of the elves, who greatly respected them too. Thus, the meeting which would later be known as the Man-Monster Summit was underway. Firstly, he decided to give everyone who was not aware the quick version of his story. And that what I told you is the true course of events. However, at Gazel's suggestion, it is not the course of events we will reveal to the world at large. He motioned to the dwarf, who stood up and drew everyone's attention. No one will accept an offer of friendship from someone whose hands are stained with blood. He began. If what Rimuru aims for is to happen, that is coexistence between human and monsters, his role in Falmouth's army disappearance is a massive detriment. However, he said as he looked over at where Veldora was lounging, it's a different story if the infamous storm dragon Veldora takes the blame. Veldora perked up from his manga to look at the king, since he is already a legendary beast whose actions are considered an act of nature. He finished by looking at Elalud to continue. And so, the Archduke said as he too stood up, I endorse this narrative as well. Rather than my daughter, a noble of Thalian, being responsible for the birth of a new demon lord, it would look instead like she helped introduce us to the demon lord who enabled the storm dragon to be pacified through negotiation. He finished. His daughter didn't look too impressed, but Rimuru shot her a look telling her not to say anything. She obeyed, pouting. And that's the story, Rimuru said as he stood up. Falmouth attacked us, we fought back, and the bloodshed awoke Veldora from his slumber. Falmouth was utterly annihilated in the process, but thanks to me being friends with him we managed to pacify him. Any objections? He asked, looking around. No one looked to do so, so he looked at Veldora. What about you? You'll be taking the blame. KWA ha ha. No problem. Veldora quickly said. I am your sworn friend, so you can freely use the influence of the storm dragon as you want. He said with a smile. Rimuru smiled back. Thanks, old man. Alright then, with that out of the way, Rimuru. Gazel said as he sat back down. What are you going to do with the prisoners? They might spill the truth. No, they won't, Rimuru said with determination. I will make the kingdom of Falmouth fall in one fell swoop. First, we are going to release the current king, and make him pay reparations for his war. If not, he said as he sat down, I will ask them to submit as vassals to Tempest. Rimuru, the nobles in Falmouth are corrupt to the bones. Fuse said. They will most likely not comply with such demands. I'm counting on it. He told the guildmaster, both the reparations and the vassalage are a pretext. The real objective is to cause a civil war and bring down the current nobility in Falmouth, he said to all assembled. Yom, he called out to the man, who stood up facing him. Once they are down, we will have it reborn as a new country, under the leadership of the champion Yom, he said as everyone looked at the champion in question. I see, Gazel said as he eyed the champion. You don't seem surprised, kiddo, he said to the human, who just scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. Yeah, boss already told me in secret. Gazel did not look impressed.
While everyone else was murmuring among themselves about Rimuru's declaration, he was staring down the human. Then, suddenly, his aura exploded outwards. Some, like the other humans, had to hold themselves in place from the force, but most others were not much affected. Yom, though he struggled for a moment, managed to hold himself up and stand his ground. After a few more seconds, Gazel relented and his aura dissipated. He sighed. Your willpower is commendable, but are you really prepared for what Rimuru is suggesting? Yom continued to stare down the dwarf king. With a smile, he placed a hand on his heart. If the boss asked it of me, you can count on me, he shouted. Then with a grin he added, besides, don't you think it's just natural for a guy to want to look cool in front of the girl he fell in love with?
Gazel could do nothing but stare. Behind Yom, Grucius had to stop himself from a laughing fit while Murin tried very hard to hide her embarrassment. Ha! Good one, Grucius said as he stepped forward, standing beside Yom, king of the dwarves. He said to Gazel with a respectful bow, I, Grucius of Eurazania, can guarantee this guy. He's a fool. But not irresponsible. Until the day he can call himself a heroic king like you. I will watch over him, he said with a small grin. Gazel looked over at the two, then at Rimuru. He can be trusted. Besides, Rimuru said with a sly grin, he's also Hakuro's disciple. Looking at his old master in the back of the gathered crowd, the dwarf king almost smiled. Very well. He told Yom and Grucius, in that case, you may also rely on my help, should you want it. Thank you, Gazel, Rimuru said. Now, is there anything else we should be talking? Yes, I have something to say, Fuse said. Rimuru nodded at him to continue. In Falmouth, there is a distant relative of the King of Bloomond. Marquis Muller. I believe we can negotiate to bring him to our side. Rimuru was about to ask more, but Elalud stood up with a light laugh. He turned top Fuse and the two had a pretty one-sided quick rundown of Bloomond's intentions. Rimuru honestly kinda tuned out for a bit before the Archduke backed down from Fuse, seemingly content with Fuse's answer, which boiled down to, better the monsters led by a demon lord than the humans who were defeated by them. Well, then, Demon Lord Rimuru. Elalud said as he turned to Rimuru, I ask this of you, how do you intend to use your powers? Rimuru looked at the man. A deafening silence sat in. He though how to respond to the question. That all. It's simple, really. I want to create a world where people can live in comfort and peace, where everyone can live with a smile on their faces. Especially, he had to pause for a second as he thought of a certain smiling girl, which made him hold his breath for a moment, especially the people I care about the most. Elalud looked on for a second as he considered Rimmeru's words. That's such a pipe dream. He said loudly, do you honestly believe you can accomplish something like that? Of course. Rimmeru answered immediately, that is what my power is for. He said with conviction as he stood up, facing down the elf even though he was shorter. Power without ideal is rubbish, but so are ideals without power. Don't you agree? I do not seek power for power's sake. I seek it. For a purpose. He finished. Elalud had to stay silent for a few moments. Then, he burst out laughing. This demon lord. Ha ha. After managing to calm down a bit, he bowed low, his attendants following suit. Apologies. Now I understand. As the envoy and Archduke of Thalian, I would like to request the establishment of diplomatic relationship between our two countries, he said with sincerity. We gladly accept, Elalud. Rimmeru said, not having to think on it. He was really hoping for it, in fact. After a brief cheer, the Archduke got a bit closer to Rimmeru and said in a low voice. I didn't expect you to call me by my name. Rimmeru immediately panicked, but Elalud interrupted. In personal conversation it's fine, but, in public, please do use my title. He said to a sheepishly looking Rimmeru, that's one lesson you can learn from me. He said with a smile as he went back to his seat. Alright, then, Rimmeru said as things calmed down, how about we take a short break? However, fate had other plans. Something whizzed into the room at high speeds, nearly crashing into him. He had to take a quick step back as he looked at the intruder, a small, fairy-like girl. The nuisance otherwise known as Ramiris the Spirit Queen. Also a demon lord, allegedly. Everyone in the room turned to look at the fairy as her voice rang out. Rimuru. She shouted. Listen up. Your nation is doomed. She shouted, panicked. However, all Rimuru could do was stare, dumbfounded. Wah! Was all he could make out before Ramiris was snatched from the air. Diablo held the fairy by the winds, looking very annoyed. How should I dispose of this annoying insect, my lord? He asked, casually. Behind him, Rimuru could see Beretta only now emerging from the door, apologizing profusely to the guards she had to hold down for Ramiris to get in. Ah, no, don't dispose of her, he told the demon. He ignored the fairy's screams as he knew what to do. Rimuru sir, that fairy. Fuse said as he looked at her, just as dumbfounded as he was of the sudden situation. Yeah, she's a friend. He had to stretch the definition, though, she may not look it, but this is Ramiris, one of the 10 demon lords, allegedly, he told him. What ya mean allegedly? The fairy in question screamed at him, then started struggling in Diablo's grasp to no avail. I come all the way here with important information and this is how you treat me. She said. Rimuru decided to deal with her later, so he snatched her from Diablo and walked over to Veldora. Hey, Veldora, could you deal with her for a second? He said, holding her up to him. Not now, man, the dragon otaku said, not even looking up. I'm almost to the end of this thrilling mystery. Rimuru was not having it. The culprit is, and so he mercilessly spoiled the manga. Veldora suddenly had the look of a man dead inside. He was muttering while crying, how could you? Meanwhile, Ramiris fainted after taking one good look at Veldora and realizing he was the real deal. Rimuru casually gave her to Veldora, who robotically took her in his hand while still crying. Feeling very much bad about what he did, Rimuru turned to continue the summit. Alright, sorry for the interruption. He told them, now, let's get to the final point of this meeting. First I would like to talk about keeping the Western Church in check. Although for now I have no intention of starting a war on two fronts, we will respond in force if they do anything. Sorry, Sir Rimuru. Fuse interrupted. War on two fronts. Yes, that's the second part of what I wanted to talk about. Namely, from now on Tempest is officially at war with Demon Lord Clayman. He declared, then took a moment to gauge their reactions. Our reasons are simple. I believe him to be behind, at least partially, Falmouth attacking us. Our guest here, Majulin, he motioned to the Majin, can vouch for his intentions, as she worked for him until recently. Hearing that, the woman stood up. For the next few minutes, she retold those who were not in the know about her relation to Clayman and his orders to infiltrate the city. And there you have it. Rimuru said as she finished, nodding for her to sit down. Clayman is the true culprit behind this. I also believe he was responsible for Milim attacking Eurazania a few days ago. He looked over at the Beatskatiers, who stood up and nodded in agreement as Albus stepped forward. I am Albus, of the 3 Beastkatiers of Demon Lord Carrier. What Sir Rimuru says, we support it wholeheartedly, was all she said. With this in mind, I intend to go to war with Clayman's forces and, eventually, kill him. Rimuru declared. For that, I requested the assistance of the beastmen under these 3. Of course, Sir Rimuru. Albus said. Our forces are at your disposal. We await your command. Rimuru nodded in gratitude. For that, we need to figure out the exact movements of Clayman's army. Soe, please fill everyone in on his army's movements, he said to the ogre. Again, Soe quickly and efficiently retold all the information he had acquired. I see. Gazel said as Soe finished. If they are marching on you, it seems very unusual to go through Demon Lord Milim's territory. Perhaps. One of Gazel's aides spoke up. The king gave him the go-ahead to say what was on his mind. Perhaps his aim isn't you after all. He said. Rimuru had to give that a bit of though. However, Benimaru was quicker than him. Maybe. His goal is Eurazania. He said. The 3 Beastkatiers perked up hearing that. That's when Rimuru had a realization. Eurazania. Maybe. If he wanted to ascend as a true demon lord, he would need to kill a lot of people. Without Carrion to defend them, he said, a bit absent-mindedly. There are still tens of thousands of beastmen in Eurazania. Sufia said as she stood up. Panicked, most of them are defenseless. He wouldn't. He would. Majulin interrupted. He would have no qualms about it at all. I see. Rimuru said. The reason Clayman had Milim attack was to take out Carrion so that he would be out of the way, unable to defend against his invading armies. And Tempest, he said looking around to his subordinates, as we had a treaty with Eurazania, we had to be incapacitated, immediately. That bastard. Phobio said through clenched teeth. This is a serious problem, assuming it's true. Gazel said as he stroked his chin. There is no conceivable way for you to get your forces to Eurazania before he starts the invasion. He just may win this round. No. Rimuru said with conviction. I have something up my sleeve. Actually, it was something he had Raphael work at for a few minutes when he realized where this was going. What he needed was a quick way to move thousands of troops to a distant battlefields, and so, it's a mass teleportation spell I had been working on for some time. He said as he ignored the bewildered stares of everyone. Until now, it was simply unfeasible as it required too much magicals to work. But now I have the needed amount, and then some. Basically, he looked around and grinned. We can move all our forces to where they are needed in no time. He declared. Everyone in the room stared at him in disbelief. Gazel was the first to recover. Ha ha ha. I should stop being surprised by you, Rimuru. He billowed. A light then. I believe you can handle that on your end. If you require extra men, just ask. That won't be necessary, but thank you. Now, on to other matters. The topic of discussion shifted to the information Pride tortured from the prisoners. It turned out, along with the king they had captured a famous mage from Falmouth, Raisin. After some back and forth, and the realization that letting Xian in charge of interrogation was a massive mistake, they eventually settled on sending the 3 prisoners with Yom back to Falmouth, with Diablo assisting as he had promised. And so, the summit was about to come to an end when Fuse raised his hand to speak. Ah, sorry, Rimuru, what about that fairy, Ramiris? He asked pointing at Ramiris. At some point, she had woke up and began talking with Veldora. Now, she was deeply invested in one of Veldora's manga. Beretta was desperately trying to have her pay attention, but to no avail. Rimuru got up and walked over to her. Hey, Ramiris, she ignored him. Oi, Ramiris. Still she ignored him. Getting angry, he decided to play dirty. If you don't pay attention, I will spoil who the heroine ends up with. No. She quickly spurned around and flew at him. I'm here, okay. She said as she tried to put on a dignified air, and said, like I wanted to say, Tempest is doomed. Speak plainly, He told her, running out of patents. Listen, Ramiris said with a more serious air. All your friends too, she said as she turned to everyone else in the room. At the behest of Demon Lord Clayman, the Demon Lord Banquet, Walpurgis, has been invoked. A cold air seemed to take over the room. Looking at the other higher-ups in the room, Rimuru felt something big was revealed, but unfortunate he was a bit out of the loop. Walpurgis. He asked she could answer. Gazel spoke up. A meeting of the Demon Lords, he said, just slightly shaken. It forbears war and disaster. It is never a good sign. Ah, he's exaggerating. Ramiris dismissed, ignoring Gazel's stare. Walpurgis has been held many times in the past and the humans never knew because nothing big was talked about. However, there have been times when big things were decided, like during the last Tenma War, so people mostly associated it with bad things, was what she said, but Rimuru still didn't quite get it. If it's no big deal, what's the problem? He asked her. It's not the Walpurgis itself that's the problem. She said exasperated. It's what it was called for that's the problem. Clayman called it to deal with you, to have you punished for calling yourself a demon lord. She revealed. Again, everyone in the room looked a bit shaken by that. And what's more, he was backed up by Frey and Milim. At that, he really had to perk up. Really? He asked her with anger. Hearing that Milim was backing Clayman in the meeting woke some feeling in him that he didn't quite knew he had. It felt a bit like betrayer. However, he quickly and mercilessly buried that feeling away. No, I refuse to believe Milim would turn on me. He told himself. It's that bastard Clayman. He made her. Somehow. I swear, he will suffer for this. Unconsciously, his anger began to boil over, causing his aura to flare up a bit. Hearing Ramiris yelp as she was pushed back, he quickly put a lid on it. As he looked around, he could clearly see everyone, especially those who knew of him and Milim, looking in concern. However, he decided the best thing to do was to ignore it. So, the bastard finally reveals his true intentions, huh? All right then. I can work with that. Ramiris looked over at him in concern and asked. Hey, did you really call yourself a demon lord? Yeah, I have. He told her. So what? He asked dismissively. Listen, Rimuru, she began in as serious a tone as she could. It's an unwritten rule among the demon lords that if you want someone killed or punished, you do it yourself. If someone declares themselves a demon lord and you don't like it, you kill them yourself. And if you die instead, the new guy takes your place. It's unusual for anyone to agree on this kind of meeting, she explained. I see. Rimuru calmly stated. So he's trying to rile up the other demon lords against me. Well, that works for me. Ignoring Ramiris's confused stare, he continued, why do you care, though? Ah, I mean, I like you and we're friends, right? Right, she asked. He didn't answer. And besides, if you die, then what happens to my Beretta? She eventually said, panicked. So, I have decided to take your side. Be grateful. You only need one more demon lord to side with you and you'll be mostly good. Mostly good? He asked her. Yeah, then the council will probably refuse Clayman's dumb request. He will definitely have to take you on himself then. As you are now, you can take him out no problemo. She emphasized with some kicks. Rimuru finally understood where she was coming from. He wasn't sure who else would side with him, but he would cross that bridge when he got there. In that case, if you're going there, could you take me with you to defend myself? He asked her. She looked at him and though for a second. Ah, yeah, of course. She excitedly said. Someone should be coming for me, so you can come along. I can notify Guy that I'm bringing you along. Guy? He asked. He assumed that was another demon lord. Demon Lord Guy Crimson. Elalude shouted from where he was standing, looking whiter than he was before. The Lord of Darkness, the first demon lord. His name seemed to be quite the big deal as many in the room looked equally pale at the mere mention of the name. Among the demon lords, he and the destroyer, Milim Nava, are the most powerful and feared. Fuse said, looking about to faint. Heck, at least I know the destroyer can be reasoned with and placated. By Guy Crimson. The only times he has ever showed himself is when he destroys entire nations. Ramiris looked unperturbed. Ah, don't worry, he's cool. She declared. Most of the time, she added to the side. He's also a reasonable person who'll definitely not object. Heck, I bet he'll take a liking to you and side with you, Rimuru. She said, but he wasn't so convinced, based on the looks of abject terror the name inspired. Still, he figured he would cross that bridge too, eventually. Okay then, Ramiris, he said as he looked her in the eyes, please get the word out. Let's get ready for Walpurgis. With all the pieces in place, Rimuru was determined to see that he, not Clayman, would come out victorious. And if a single hair on Milim was out of place, then Clayman's fate would be a pitiable one indeed.